Before we start the webinar, I just want to check in with our panelists and make sure that their audio and video is working. So Mitchell and Bryan, can you hear me?
Mitchel's here.
And this is Bryan, I can hear you.
Excellent. I can hear you both. All right, it looks like we've hit 2:05, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Today's topic, as you can see, is going to be our cyber professional versus cyber criminal and who's actually winning. We know that there's a general perception out there right now that cyber crimes have increased both in scale and frequency, and that there's a general cause for concern. And if you're a business person or if you're a business owner, you're well within your right to be concerned. But we have two experts with us today that will be helping us understand that landscape better and whether there's something that we can do to mitigate that, and also what level that concern should be at. So joining us today, we have Bryan P. Smith, who is a section chief of the cybercriminal section at the FBI. And we also have with us today, Mitchel Chang, who is the SVP of Corporate Social Responsibility and the Initiative for Education at TrendMicro. And I will be giving them a much better introduction later on. I do want to thank TrendMicro as our sponsor for this program today. So if you haven't joined one of our webinars before, or if you have, you might remember some of this information, but the National Cybersecurity Alliance is an alliance of convening partners who believe in the strength of the security collective. We believe that coming together is the best way to share ideas and making each other stronger when it comes to security, and educating both individuals and organizations on security best practices, which is why we host programs like this one. And of course, we believe in amplifying collective efforts to increase cybersecurity awareness. If you don't have time to do anything else, the one thing I would recommend is following us on our social medias. That means Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you have time to click follow on. We share all of our resources and all of our events on those platforms, as well as StaySafeOnline.org, where we also house the Stay Safe Online blog. And then, of course, another thank you to our sponsors. We do have sponsorship slots available. We have affiliate, contributing, and signature sponsorships available. And you would be able to reach a business community, a small and medium-sized business community of over 10,000 webinar attendees, as well as 5,000 workshop attendees, and over 14,000 newsletter subscribers. So if you're interested, please email us at info@StaySafeOnline.org. And over the next month, as we all know, Cybersecurity Awareness Month is coming up, and we have plenty of programming coming up for October. Just want to flag two things for us here during this webinar. September 13th, we're also hosting a webinar called Ransomware and Responsibility. So that would be government responsibility and individual responsibility explained, AKA how much is it the government's responsibility to respond to these attacks, and how much is it your responsibility? What can you actually do? And then, of course, on October 14th, we have our large-scale Cybersecure My Business event coming up called Cybersecurity in a Flash. The theme of that talk is going to be ransomware response and recovery. And for more information on that, please look out for our next newsletter, where we'll have everything available. So, as we always do, we're going to talk about the what and the why. What are we talking about today? Cyber professionals versus cyber criminals. We do often refer to cyber attackers or cyber criminals as adversaries. So there is a very divisive, there can be very divisive language used, but we just want everyone in the community to be able to understand what they're up against. So this is not a fear, uncertainty, doubt webinar. This is a information and education webinar. We just want to start off by saying that for sure. And then, as mentioned before, public outlook right now is not necessarily the greatest. We know that the headlines, whether that be JBS, whether that be Colonial Pipeline, there have been plenty of them to scare people off last year and earlier this year. And we want to make sure that we are serving your concern and not your fear. So And then, of course, in the small to medium-sized business community, we also understand that attacks are affecting every part of the supply chain. And so we know that from start to finish, day to day, it can affect everything that you do. And we want to make sure that we, again, address all of those concerns. And we know that there's a justified level of concern in the business community today, and what we want to be able to inform what the actual situation is, and we want to be able to inform what you can do to help that. So with that being said, I want to introduce our speakers, one of whom today is Mitchel Chang. As mentioned earlier, he is an SVP for Corporate Social Responsibility and Initiative for Education at TrendMicro. He has been with TrendMicro since 2003 and has overseen, has served 12 years as Senior Vice President of Global Technical Support, and as part of the executive team, he was responsible for developing an internationally recognized and award-winning support team. Mitchel is actively engaged with 3 of TrendMicro's major education outreach programs, one of which is Internet Safety for Home and Small Businesses, the second is Internet Safety for Kids and Families, and the third is Cybersecurity Education for Universities. I'm very fortunate to know Mitchel as one of our sponsors, and he is extremely dedicated to educating people on security, so I'm very excited to have him with us today. And then, of course, we also have Bryan Smith as the section chief for the FBI's cybercriminal section. He is responsible for the FBI's operational programs targeting sophisticated cyber threats from criminal actors. Prior to this current role, he served as the Assistant Special Agent in charge over the Cleveland Field Office's cyber/white-collar branch, which includes the cyber criminal, healthcare fraud, organized crime, public corruption, technical, and white-collar crime squads. Previously, he was the unit chief of the FBI's Financial Institution Fraud Unit, responsible for the oversight of the FBI's national asset forfeiture, bank fraud, identity theft, intellectual property rights, money laundering, and mortgage fraud programs. So goes without saying, I'm very grateful to have them both here with us today. And without further ado, I'm gonna let Mitchel talk a little bit more about some of the slides he put together for us.
Okay, hi, thank you, Zarmeena. Yeah, so I'd like to kind of just share with you a few slides and give you my perspective how everything is. So certainly from my view, I think there's a sort of battle going back and forth between the good and the evil, if you will, between the good guys and bad guys on, you know, overall the defense are attacking of users. And first I want to share with you is from the more of from a technical perspective. I've been in technology since I graduated from university. I initially was working on hardware and chip design, and I kind of got into IT somewhere middle in my career. And I think we're in a technology perspective, we're living a quite interesting time right now because a lot of technology evolutions start coming together. And they're kind of, from my perspective, they're kind of related to each other. And we're in a process, it's a lot of sort of, we're going to go through some disruption to how we purchase things and how we live our life. I think because the COVID-19 pandemic, that actually kind of accelerated some of these aspects. For example, you know, are we going to always still be going to mall to do our shops, right? Because you have a platform like Amazon today that help you do a lot of shopping from home. And I think you know, mobile payment is going to exceed $1 trillion as we speak. That these are kind of things we can never imagine 10 or 15, 20 years ago when we first start using internet. And next slide, please. Can someone advance the slide? Or I have control. Okay.
Sorry, there was a...
Okay. Yeah. So we're going through this the so-called digital transformation, And part of this transformation, you guys may heard something called Industry 4.0. This is where a lot of Internet of Things, these devices, smart devices, been put in out, and whether it's a smart, home appliances or smart factory devices, and these are put in place, and they're growing at a very rapid rate. We're talking from 0 to 10, 20 billion devices out there today already, and these are all related because these are potentially huge benefit, like the industrial IoT devices that's put in the smart factories that will definitely help produce more efficiency, less outage. And also the medical field is using a lot of more information and smart devices. The reason we can do the smart devices today is because the computing technology kind of got to a point we can start analyzing what we call big data, a huge amount of data, and there's a new field like data scientists start coming into the market, and so everything started coming together. And next slide, please. So the benefit is huge, but unfortunately, there's more data and more information we have to protect. And on top of that, adding the environmental factor, like because of pandemic, we have work from home, and also potential social engineering aspect of leveraging all this information that give the cyber criminal a lot more opportunity. And so with all the social engineering and the new data technology, also the criminals they're also leveraging the cloud, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, these type of technology to write codes that try to do bad things. For example, we know for a fact a lot of organized crime or hackers, when they write code, try to attack your system. They try to run regression tests against an antivirus product that's running on your machine, so they can successfully disable your those protections before they launch attack. And so there's ongoing technology field, but also what made things more complicated, they're using social engineering attack, which I think we're going to talk more about. That is they try to disguise you as somebody you're familiar with, and by using more what we call spear phishing kind of email to lure you to click on things you're not supposed to click, and open up vulnerabilities. And from my perspective, a company like TrendMicro, we have a product like a lot of other cybersecurity vendors, but also the community, the government, and nonprofit organizations, and the schools, we have to all work together. Law enforcement, we have to work together to educate and bring a higher level of awareness to our community, especially the small business communities. Go ahead, next slide. This may be a good segue to introduce Bryan. Bryan, would you like to comment on this slide from your perspective from the law enforcement?
Certainly, Mitchell. Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate kind of laying some foundational comments in there. So certainly cyber has been an increasing problem, and it's increasing exponentially over the last probably 10 to 15 years. And we'll get into some details here as far as some of the things that we're seeing, some of the actions, some of the things that we're asking businesses and individuals to take into account in their own cybersecurity practices. But on the whole, I think our hope is, or my hope coming out of this is that people understand that, one, cyber is not an IT problem, it's a business problem, and that we need to start looking at it as a business problem. So we went through my background a little bit. Prior to the, so I've got 19 years in the FBI. Prior to the FBI, I worked for Anderson Consulting and Deloitte & Touche, doing systems integration work for them back in the 1990s. And one of the things I learned from that is you think about that model that the Big Five or Big Four use in their consulting, is that you get to understand the businesses, so you can do business consulting for them by understanding the systems and understanding the passage of information from one department to another, the interaction with vendors, with end customers, whether that be that retail or other companies and businesses. And so we invested in these systems, these IT systems, to solve business problems. But in some part along the way, we've somewhat divorced IT from the core business. And we've looked at it and said, well, hey, we've got to invest in, this technology, and we'll hire these computer scientists, and we'll hire network administrators, and it's their problem. And your business folks thought, hey, I'll put the risk on them. I don't need to be worrying about that. And what we've seen from what the adversary is doing is they're attacking the business component of it. And so the message that we're trying to bring to folks, and we'll go on this a little bit later, is how and why, but we want to bring the business folks into talking with the IT folks. And for us, that's the way that you're going to start addressing this. We certainly have seen the number of ransomware complaints have increased dramatically over the last year or so, and there's some reasons behind that, and that gets into the second thing that we want out of this, or at least what I want out of this, is I want people to understand the need to report, and that there's some things that we can do, either the FBI or some of our partners within the government or the private sector. But if we don't get a phone call, if we don't have someone reach out to us, we can't help you. And so there's some pretty interesting things that we've done, particularly even of late, and I'm sure that some people have seen. I can't talk specifics on it as far as what went on with Colonial, but we sometimes are afforded some opportunities, and we want to take advantage of those so we can recoup losses for victims. And whether that's in a ransomware case, whether that's a BEC case, or any sort of other banking Trojan or things like that, our objective is not only to go after and hold the individuals and the criminal enterprise accountable for their action, but where possible, also try and recoup the losses and or prevent the activity. And that's why we're here for events such as this, is that the prevention piece is hugely important. I want to see the number of our cases diminish over time, not increase. And that comes from having a knowledgeable and prepared public sector that's willing to then partner with the FBI or other law enforcement so that we can go after these bad actors that are out there. I'll turn it back over to Mitchell.
Okay,
Thank you for
that. Next slide. Okay, I think this is our last slide, just as an opener. The point I want to make here, is there's a lot of more system as we grow in technology, and the challenge, especially for the small business out there, is you have much less resource to focus on this. So create a higher level of awareness and understand what you need to do is very important. Unlike a very large enterprise, they may have a team of people to help you protect your whether it's on premise or in the cloud. And as the manufacturing start open up smart factory, we have smart everything, smart cities, smart factories. These are the devices that sits on. A lot of time they're not sitting on the IT network. They're on, they call operation technology manufacturing network. They may have this, they may not have the security expertise, and maybe much more vulnerable as they open those up. But again, the benefit of such a progression is huge, because imagine, you can get all analytic from the factory floor directly, or oil refinery or like Colonial Pipeline, and they can really increase their efficiency. But the risk there is potentially the bad guys can get to it. And so how do we work with the community and organization to protect? And again, I think usually a small, medium business is in a little sort of disadvantaged position because you have a little less resource. But nevertheless, I think, we all work together. It's a community, and along with law enforcement, we certainly have a good chance to winning the battle here. Okay.
Yeah, and Mitchell, if I could jump in there, I think, it's a great point of the small businesses is that they don't necessarily have the same resources as your Boeings of the world and your Caterpillars and things like that. And the adversaries know this. And it's no longer the days when you could say, hey, I'm so small that I'm under the radar of these groups. They are going out actively searching for potential victims. And we talk to these people. We talk to these people when we arrest them. And find out, why did you pick these particular entities? And they saw them as soft targets. And so, there's that old adage of you don't have to, when the bear is chasing you, you don't have to be the fastest one. You just have to be faster than one person. And that's some good advice for this environment is that you want to harden yourself as a target so that you are harder to get into than another entity. And if you don't have those resources, what is it that you can do? Well, there's some really good public-private partnerships that are out there. There's lots of groups that are sharing indicators of compromise. And so when it hits one entity or they block something, they're sharing it with other corporations because this is some shared space. And I think for a long time, people saw this as a competitive advantage of if I can lock myself down, then I'll use that against my competitor, and certainly I think financial institutions had looked at it that way. But now you're seeing an environment where people are sharing that across because they recognize that if we don't stop this as a group, none of us is big enough to keep up with it. So there is the sharing of information is one way, getting involved in public-private partnerships. And then, like I said earlier, is engaging the business lines within your companies, of understanding what is it that's important to you and your company. And one of the stories that, this has always struck me when it happened, and so I tell it pretty much every time I speak. We had a victim that was a chemical company, and so we went out to the company, asked them what happened, and what's important to the company. What is it that could have been stolen that could be utilized? And the IT people said, well, chemical companies, so it's these chemical compounds, and so those are on lock and key, and so there's only a handful of people who have access to that. So great. I was an accounting major in college. That makes sense to me. We then go talk to the business folks, and they're saying, well, no, those chemical compounds, like any second year chemistry student in college knows those compounds. Our competitive advantage is the proprietary software and the business processes that we put in place for the production of of those chemicals. And so you had an IT department that had locked down information that you could get publicly on the web. And the stuff that was really valuable, the crown jewels for the company, anybody could access once you got in there. And so, that is the example of if you don't have those groups talking, and I don't blame the IT guys, like, why would they know the business side of it? Why would they know? I mean, I would think the chemical compound would be the most important thing. So until you start having those conversations within your business of what's important, what do we need to lock down, and you can focus on really those crown jewels, you have a good chance of beating this back, because you can't protect everything equally. The other part is that those things may differ by groups within your company. And so if you've got a finance group. What's important to them may be different than what maybe the sales folks are talking about. And so you need to look at it between each of the functions within your organization and find out, what are the 3 to 4 things within each that are important, and work with your IT folks to how do we protect those individually.
That has to be some of the best advice I've heard lately. Making sure that you understand what your crown jewels are in your company and going after them as far as protecting them. I do have a general question that I'm sure is on the minds of all of our audience members. So referring back to the name of this webinar, the general doom and gloom that's been painted by certain headlines and media sources, we'd like to get some insight from both of you on how you feel it's actually looking out there, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, well, from the vendor's perspective, I will have to say there's a lot of cases that hit the newspaper and media are that somebody got attacked, but at the same time there's probably hundreds of companies successfully protected themselves, and so we only usually hear about the bad things, and so I'm pretty optimistic, and to me, because I'm a technologist for most of my life, and that when I look at the problem dissect the problem into how we can protect ourselves, I think things look pretty promising. But what we have less control is actually people's behavior, right? If they after they get training on not to click on a phishing email, they still click on it, then it's a challenge to protect. You can have the best protection in the world, but somebody gets spoofed on an email because of social engineering, then you potentially can open up some backdoors and vulnerabilities that you can expose not just yourself but your entire organization potentially.
So speaking of phishing, we have a few discussion questions for business email compromise. Unless, Bryan, did you want to speak to the last question before I move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'd like to take a little crack at that. So I'm an optimist, even though I'm Irish, which means that we tend to think the worst is going to happen. But somehow I'm an optimist on things. But I don't think that doesn't happen by accident. That any success that we have in this arena comes from people taking actions. And it's not something they're going to be able to wish away. And so that's where, the entities that get this right are the ones that are sharing information. They're the ones that are being protected. And so every day, we've got public-private partnerships, and we've got entities who are sharing data across industries and seeing indicators of compromise and passing them on to competitors who are then protecting their networks. And those are successes that we see daily. And we've got 2 different units within the FBI who kind of facilitate that sort of sharing. And there's a whole host of that going around across the country. And you can reach out to your local field office to try and get involved in some of those groups. I'm hopeful that we're turning the corner on reporting. We don't get enough of it. There's a lot of attacks that happen out there that we don't hear about. And like I said in my open comments, if we don't hear about it, we can't help you on it. I'm struck because I was watching CNBC, and Brian Moynihan from Bank of America was making some comments about cyber and cybersecurity, and said that, in the industry that they had this hesitation. They didn't see this as a crime problem. And I think that's one of the issues that we faced a lot, is people see this as a public relations problem. And so they're concerned about people learning that there was a breach or a hack or some other cyber activity on their network. And so they just try to cover it. I say cover up, which is never a good thing to hear from the FBI, but they try and, minimize it, have attorneys handle it and things like that, but they're not getting at the root of the problem. And so he said that, at least in their industry, they've changed, like if there's a bank robbery, at Bank of America, they're going to call the FBI or local law enforcement and have them come out there and give them everything that they need to solve it. We don't necessarily have that in the cyber arena. And so the other thing that people can do if they want to make sure that we're winning this war, in this battle, is that when something happens, they report it and they give us the information that we need on it. Sometimes people give us things, you know, they tell us there's an event, but they don't give any detail. So it's like telling us that there's a bank robbery, but you don't give us the note that has the fingerprint of the robber. You don't give us the bait bills that you handed to the individual, and then you expect something good to happen from it. So these things take actions. It takes actions by the victim, and it takes action by law enforcement. So it's working that together. So I'm hopeful that we're turning the corner on it, and there's some ways to do that. But sitting in a silo will keep us in the same position that we are right now.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mitchel.
Yeah, Zarmeena, so like to tie what Bryan just say, and also tie into your next question regarding business email compromise. One thing I like to add is also for the folks that's out there, if you're running a small business, when we talk about 10 users or less, like a family business, you're still a small business. And I think my recommendations, there's certain things you have to be kind of aware of, you know, attending a webinar like this would be a good start, but something we call cybersecurity hygiene, like, you know, things you do, like you use strong password, and most of the platform today support what we call multi-factor authentication, which means there's multiple ways to verify who you are before you can log in, like the Google, Facebook, they all you know, they text message you a little code, or for you to click on something, the device you own or something you have, your fingerprint or something to do that. Those are very critical. And so as long as you understand those fundamental concepts, and it's kind of like a small business, I always use the car mechanic. Some people can do their own network. They're technically sharp doing a network, but if you don't know how to fix your car, you always find a good mechanic. So for small business, it's very important you find like a consultant or somebody that's an IT system integrator to help you to set up your network and provide a layer of security you need. And the business email compromise, I think what we're seeing is quite organized. These are for-profit businesses. They first go out there, do reconnaissance to the victim, and they try to find out. Let's say, you know, they will find out. Like if you're running a company, you're a business owner, they will find out, like, you know, what's other executive that you work with, and also your personal friend. And so they may look at all your social media. And so that also go back to the cybersecurity hygiene. If you can't help it, don't post too much public information that's like who's my buddy, who's my friend, who's my family. And if they know that they will use the social engineering aspect against you, along with other data. They may send you a spear phishing email. It looks like from your close colleague, associates, or your family members. And once they establish that, they can start demanding things that, you know, because when you think it is your friend that's contacting you or somebody you know, your guard usually are down. And that combining with potentially information that's compromised by people you associate with, like, for example, your credit card company somehow got compromised, your personal information got stolen, and they can use those information in addition to some reconnaissance. So that make the attacking very powerful one. You know, it can easily fool even the seasoned computer savvy folks.
Right. It's a very good point, and this is why we always advise that people double check their sources and slow down when they're checking emails, text messages, and other things. So question for Bryan, do you see business email compromise as one of the more challenging attacks in the arena, and why so or why not?
So it's not the most sophisticated attack out there, but Mitchell is right as far as what these individuals do is they're very persistent and they do their research, and they're patient, and they will use some sort of spirit. They'll research you, figure out what it is that's going to get them into your company or get them into your account. And so all those things that we post online, whether it's in social media or it's things that we post as a business of activities and things like that, and who's who within the company, and putting email addresses of people like in accounts payable, not a good idea. They find those things and then they go and they do research, just like we would on an adversary, and find things about them and find out what your interests are. And so, they're going to send, I'm a San Francisco 49ers football fan. They're not going to send me something on the Washington Redskins. They're going to recognize that, and they're going to send me an email with a JPEG for the 49ers new uniform. And when I click on that, then that's when they get into my system, and then they'll sit there. They'll sit there for a while, and they'll monitor activities, and they'll see, who's who within the enterprise, who makes the requests for wire transfers and things like that. And then they'll monitor things on the company website, particularly activities or social media for folks like the CFO or the CEO. And they use that to their advantage. And so then they'll send me as the accounts payable clerk an email saying, this is Joe. I'm getting on the plane to go to that conference in Denver, and I need you to send this wire transfer here for $5 million to close this deal. Can you make that happen? I'm going to be unavailable for a couple hours. Well, I know that Joe is flying out to speak at a conference in Denver. And so the adversary has used this information. I'm not saying that we shouldn't publicize these things that we're doing on it, but we have to be cognizant of all the information that we're exposing out there and how it could be then manipulated and taken advantage of by our adversary. The nice thing with BEC is that there are some things that people can do. There is dual factor authentication that you can do within your own company. And that may be, depending on the environment you're in, that could be walking down the hall, that could be making phone calls. That should not be a dual factor authentication by sending an email back to them, confirming that they want to do the wire transfer. Because we've seen that, and that's just an email back to the bad guy. But there's processes around this to help prevent it that you can put in place. You're going to have to keep updating those processes because the adversary sees, okay, we're not having success here. How do we go about doing this? But these are not always technological solutions. And that goes back to the point at the beginning of this is not necessarily an IT problem. It's a business problem. And so it's a combination of the people, the processes, and the technology coming together to address what it is, the activity that the adversary is doing. And I dare say, the thing that we're actually asking people to do, and I hate that this is recorded because now it's going to be out there, we want people to think like a criminal of, if I'm a bad guy, how would I exploit this? And then start patching that up and using the technology, people, and processes to do so.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think one of the things that we always teach in our workshops and webinars also is that what threat modeling is and how it can be used to apply to certain roles and certain people in your organization, so that people understand what their personal threat model is. And that refers a lot to, like you said, Bryan, thinking about yourself as a target, or thinking about how a criminal may view you or your information. So as a business, we do actually encourage you to do that. I would agree with that. And I have a couple of questions based on the IC3 report. So the report had recorded losses of over 4 billion in 2020. Couple of questions for both of you. Is this an accurate representation of the general cyber threat, and what does the scope look like?
I'll start, and then Mitchell, if you want to jump in. Short answer is no.
Okay.
the IC3 reporting is based off what people are reporting to us. And so we don't know what it looks like out there. There's some estimates by private industry. Some people say that, 40% gets reported, some say 60, some say as low as 20% gets reported. So we know that that's not the totality of it, because I go out and give speeches to insurance groups all the time who sell cyber insurance, and I've never gotten those are not in there. But it's still big and it's growing exponentially. So that gives that the second issue of you got to report. You got to let us know these things happen, and particularly in the BEC environment. So one thing I'll tell you is that we have what we call a financial fraud kill chain in place, and we are able, in some instances, to get money back to victims. And I think last year we were able to retrieve, or not us, but we then alert the financial institutions who actually retrieved almost $500 million for victims that would have gone out the door. But the only way we're able to do that is people report to the IC3 and they report timely. If you wait, and it can be days, it can be hours. If you wait too long, the opportunity to claw back that money is lost. So we really encourage people to report the stuff. We can't make promises of what we can do on it, but we certainly can't do anything if you don't report.
So in line with that same question, unless Mitchell, did you want to chime in real quick?
Yeah, I fully concur with Bryan. And you can think cybersecurity vendor like TrendMicro, we're kind of like selling locks to the bank, right? And the folks who steal money from the bank are actually bank robbers. So when they get the money is huge. I mean, there's huge amount of funding behind these organized criminal organizations. In old days when we started this, the phishing email stuff, they have misspelled word, typo. That doesn't look very professional. But now the stuff coming through is, they hire, they can hire better technical writer than the vendors. But I think one thing business I think must realize is the liability, the assets you have, the information. For example, you're like a dental office, the few hundred clients you have, their credit card information, whatever they have in your system, there's a huge amount of liability there. And people, when they compromise your system, they steal that information, they sell it, and the risk is quite high. And the amount of protection you have to invest, either your resource, time, or money, is actually relatively low to protect yourself. But it's certainly something people have to be aware of it.
Thank you for that. So again, in line with this this topic, I do have a couple more questions. So do you both think or find that this is or this organized type of cybercrime is profitable for these criminals, and do you see the scope growing? I think is the real question here.
The short answer is yes. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't profitable. And they look at it from a risk profile. And so where you see things like, if you look at even like ransomware, a couple of years ago, we were talking about a couple $100 in ransom payment amounts, maybe $1,000, couple $1,000. Now you're talking about millions of dollars, because they've recognized, they run it like a business, and that if they can get an entity that is relying upon whatever portion of the business that they've been able to lock down, they can shut them down, and essentially it's cost effective for the company to make the payment to them. And so they take advantage of that. So if we make the cost for them to do business higher, that is how we move them onto something else. And that cost can be law enforcement action, which is, indicting somebody, arresting somebody. It is also then how we engage in our business. So we make it harder for them to gain access and harder for them to monetize what it is that they're doing with their cyber attacks. And so it's two-pronged. So there's certainly a law enforcement angle to that, and our ask is that people report to us so we can do something about it. That's why we all joined the FBI and law enforcement, was to help people. But the other ask is for the folks on the line here of harden yourself as a target and make it harder for them. Thinking from, it's a business proposition, is I make this harder for my competitor, then I'm gonna, they may not be a going concern in a couple of years. Well, let's do the same thing to the adversary, and we've got to do it in a bunch of different ways. And it just can't be one way, which is, arresting our way out of the problem.
Got it. Mitchell, did you want to?
Yeah, and also I like to add, I think something like ransomware, initially when we saw it, is same as Bryan, is more of a consumer play. Now they're using the same technique, attacking largest enterprise or in the case Colonial Pipeline, which probably have operation technology in addition to the IT side. And I think the criminals they're using for the most cost-effective way also. That's why the spear phishing email became a huge. We saw a big amount of growth in that in the past several years. That because it's not that expensive to send out these phishing or spam emails that to fool people, because even they may launch thousands of email, they only get one or few people click on the things they're not supposed to click on, but still it's quite profitable there for the criminals.
So one of the repeated points here is to report, right? So there has been a question that came in about reporting. If you could, Bryan, give us a quick overview of what details businesses would need to have when they're reporting to institutions like the FBI, that would be helpful for them.
Yeah, certainly. So first, there's a couple ways of reporting. One, you can report through ic3.gov. So that's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And that is run by the FBI. And so that comes into all of our holdings, and we look at that on a daily basis. You can also reach out to your local field office. And that's one of the things that we really encourage people to do, is to reach out and establish a relationship with their local FBI. We're in 56, we have 56 field offices across the country. And then in smaller cities, we'd have what we call resident agencies. So you have a satellite office. And so we have a footprint everywhere out there. And we are looking for engagement from the private sector. And what you don't want to have happen is to have an event and you don't know who to call. And so we want you to set those up in advance so that when that incident happens, that you're calling Bryan Smith at Cleveland FBI or Joe Smith in San Francisco. So that's the first part of it. The type of information that we're looking for. So there's an online form at IC3. We're going to want to know the incident, the date of the incident, what it is, whether it's banking Trojan, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a BEC, and it depends on what that event is. And so but on the whole, we're going to want to know payment information. So if it's either ransomware or BEC, there's a wire transfer, there's a Bitcoin wallet that's been provided, and we're going to want to get that from you. We're going to want to, if you've got indicators of compromise of how they got in, then we're going to want to get that. If you don't, but you have logs that and we'll take those and we can take a look at those ourselves. And then we also, we don't necessarily, a lot of people are like, well, what happens when I call the FBI? First, I'm going to tell you, we're not going to show up in the blue coats with the yellow FBI written on the back. A lot of the stuff you can just give to us over the phone. We will sometimes, if you need us to come out there, we'll come out there, and we'll come out there Friday night at 8 o'clock, and we'll work through the weekend if we need to and get the stuff that you need. And, if you want us to dress down, FBI agents, love to dress down, even though I think we should all wear suits all the time. So they can be discreet, and they can just be some other IT company that you brought in to take a look at things. And we don't want to make a scene there. But what we want is the information. We're not asking for everything in the company. We're not going through your emails and that sort of thing and taking out boxes of emails. If that is the case, then that's when we're coming in the blue coats and we have a search warrant or something like that. Not when you're calling us as a victim on this. But we do ask, one of the things that's really important is if you have a data breach and there's exfil, data that goes out of your company, we don't know the value of that data. We ask you to take a look at that. And your IT folks are not going to have an understanding of the value of that. So this goes back to, this is a business problem of, hey, what went out there? And so if it's sales presentations for potential new clients, that's important to the sales department. And all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, we keep losing out to a Chinese company on all of our bids. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe they have your presentations before you're going out there. So we're asking you guys to do kind of that functional review of it. Is it, if you're a publicly traded company, is this your financial statements? Is it stuff for your 10Ks and your Ks and Qs that you're going to file with the SEC? And that's getting out ahead of the market. And so someone could engage in insider trading based off that information. Again, we're not going to know that. We're going to see the data and the amount of it and when it went out, but we don't understand what happens behind the scenes. So we rely upon the victim to provide the context for that. And then that helps us then to understand, okay, what kind of expertise do we need to bring in from the FBI? And that is where, we are not treating this as an IT problem. So when we have cyber agents, if it involves cyber activity that then leads into securities fraud, we are going to reach out to our securities fraud experts and bring them in as a complementary skill set to the case. And so that same example I give within your corporate environment, that's what we're doing at the FBI. And we see that as a best practice of, I work securities fraud for a long time. It's sophisticated, it's complicated, and there's not many people who can work securities fraud and look at PCAP in a cyber investigation. And that's no fault of their own, but we have people who do both of those, and we want to bring them together. You guys have the same thing, and that's what you guys should be doing.
Thank you for explaining all of that. So again, in line with some of this, we have another question that came in. What should someone tell management who is leaning towards paying a ransom in a ransomware scenario? Can both of you give us your thoughts on that? And that'll be the last question.
I'll let Mitchell take this one first.
Okay, I just want to make quick mention. Of course, from technology side, there's no when the initial ransomware, some ransomware code are poorly written, that we can actually find a key somewhere to help decrypt. But nowadays they're getting more sophisticated, because once they encrypt something, certainly you can use a supercomputer to decrypt the algorithm, but it would take 30, 100 years to do that. So, and there's no guarantee that you're dealing with criminals, just like anything else. There's no guarantee even you pay the ransom, they're going to give you the key to unlock your files if they're still there. It's recoverable. So, and on a hygiene side, we certainly recommend frequent backup and have a sound backup plan, to run your business. And I do want to say one thing. I don't want to play the important the tools today. We're not here to sell tools, but I think the technology is quite sophisticated to detect some of these latest threats, including we use like machine learning, we use behavioral algorithms, so many different things are quite sophisticated. So if you're running a business, especially small business, don't count on get the freeware from somewhere downloadable endpoint device detection and thinking you got protected. You really have to consult with the professionals to get at least the business grade tools that protect your network.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when I talk about it's the people, it's the processes, it's technology. That's a three-prong approach, and Mitchel is spot on that, is that if you have all the processes and the people are trained well, it still doesn't matter if you don't have antivirus, if you don't have logging, if you don't have tools to then identify what's anomalous activity on your network, you're not going to win this battle. And so while it's not just an IT problem, it certainly is a huge portion of the solution is an IT piece of it. Back to the ransomware question, I agree with what Mitchel said in that, is that, prevention is the best form of medicine here, and having backups and going through a practice of restoring from backups. I can't tell you how many times we've had people like, oh yeah, we have backups, but then they actually never actually tried to restore from it. So they don't know how, and so it doesn't work very well, or the backups are on the same network that got encrypted. So you need to have that process, and that's got to be on a separate network from that is offset of the normal network that's being attacked. As far as the paying of ransom, we don't recommend that. We recommend that people do not pay it, and the reason behind that is that, one, you're not guaranteed that you're going to get the decryption file. We've seen a number of instances where people pay the ransom and they don't get the encryption back, and so they're back in the same position that they were before. The second part of it is that you're just reinforcing the bad behavior by the actors, and so it encourages them to do this again and gives them the resources by which they can get better at it. And so, we want to cut out the ecosystem on this, and so people not paying the ransom is probably the best way. At the end of the day, we recognize that people have to make business decisions. Our ask of people is that if they do pay the ransom, please still report it to us. Because like I said earlier, if we get that information, we might be able to do something about it. And whether, if it's a Bitcoin wallet, there's maybe, some things that we can do within the crypto tracing environment that perhaps we might get the money back, but we certainly can't get it back to you if you don't report it to us. It also helps us with understanding what that ecosystem looks like. And so while we may not be able to help you in that particular instance, understanding what wallet was used helps us maybe in a future instance of identifying, okay, well, now we know that wallet is a bad wallet, and we can look for that in the future, as well as anything that touches against it.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for sharing so much of your knowledge with us today. I wish we could keep going, but we are in fact past 3 o'clock. Thank you everyone for staying on and staying with us this long. We'll make sure to have some of these free resources that are included in the slideshow shared out with everyone, and the recording will also be shared. Please don't forget to join us for our upcoming webinars and for Cybersecurity Awareness Month activities. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon, everyone.